Good morning, St. Thomas and Grace Community. This is Reverend Rachel, and I'm sitting here in my home this morning, even though it's a chilly and beautiful day out. But I thought it might be a good place for part two of our meditations on praying with anxiety or praying through anxiety. So here I am in a place that might be recognizable to many of you. This is where I sit when we have worship together on Sunday mornings, my makeshift altar in the house, which actually brings me into some of the intro for today's conversation and prayer. One of the things that I've been thinking about anxiety, in addition to what we talked about last week, is that feeling of loss of control. It's anxiety, again, being that state of emotion where there's some kind of fear that doesn't have a direct source, or some kind of sort of existential way of being in the moment that feels overwhelming, or like you have no control, and there's no exact pinpoint for why, but it can be all-encompassing. So that's what we're talking about again this week. And I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, that state of being what we call anxiety is definitely something that hasn't gotten any less in the last week. So I think it's appropriate to continue our meditations together, maybe with a follow-up on that sort of contemplation and action, because we're hitting heavy into the contemplation, the sitting with anxiety, and there are also ways that we can productively act because of it. So I think that's an important counterpoint as well. But anyway, so we're back in the altar, back with my two boys here, Richard Rohr and James Finley, and we're all talking together about praying with anxiety. So why did I sit here today? One of the things about anxiety, as I mentioned, has to do with that loss of control. So for me, I find having a small space that I can set up and rearrange and work with helps on two levels. One, it's a channel of energy through which I can focus my looking for some kind of small control over something. I can control most of what happens here. I do have one small creature in the house who rearranges it, but that's something that is within the realm of things that Rachel Field can control, and so and can even use that control to make it beautiful and meaningful. So that's a helpful channel for that energy. The other is when working with anxiety, when sitting with anxiety, establishing a routine and establishing things that can begin to feel familiar are very helpful. So a routine for me, I know where I'm going to sit on a Sunday morning. I have everything set up, so I know how to make it work for the purposes that I need it to. And also it feels, I know it looks different, but I've got flowers, I've got icons, some nesting dolls from Russia that are painted with Jesus's life and ministry. So I have icons of Jesus. I have candles like we do on the altar. I have my prayer book. So I have, in my own way, assembled all of the materials that feel familiar, many of the materials that feel familiar to me about being in church, about being in the building that we call St. Thomas and Grace Church. So I commend that to you as well, and I'd love to see pictures or hear ideas of how you all are setting up your home spaces for prayer. So with this backdrop, turning now to our boys, Richard Rohr and James Finley. So we spent some time last week with James Finley. I'd like to spend a little more time this week focusing on Richard Rohr's book, A Lever and a Place to Stand. And the exercise that we'll do is very similar but less directed than what we did last week with visualizing our anxiety and sitting with it. This week, I'd like to practice a companion to that for helping to breathe through, and that's a simple breathing meditation, which can help. This could be a meditation that takes place in the span of 60 seconds. This could be a meditation that takes place over 60 minutes, or it could be a meditation that takes place over 5, 10, or 20 minutes, whatever time period is helpful for you for encouraging your mind and your body to be in that open space where you can feel yourself, an image that a mentor of mine uses, feel yourself sinking beneath the surface like the roots of a lily, a pond lily. Just feel those roots sinking down. So whatever time helps you with that is the time that is right for you. So in his book, A Lever and a Place to Stand, Richard Rohr talks about a breathing meditation, and the way he sets it up is very specific, because he begins by rooting the fact of breathing in our understanding of God as we've received it through the Bible, and specifically through the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. So what he noticed, he calls this the Yahweh prayer. And what he learned from a rabbi is that one of the 4 names for God in the Old Testament, and there's quite a lot of scholarship on that, which I'll just gloss over for the moment, but one of the 4 names for God, often pronounced Yahweh, is a collection of Hebrew characters that are in fact unpronounceable. And that has to do with the theological principle that God is so beyond all knowing and beyond all comprehension that we couldn't even pronounce the name of God. There are also some other themes about naming being a way of having a relationship with something or having power over something. And that those are themes that will come up in the Old Testament as well. So we don't actually, using the Yahweh characters, we do not have the ability to even say the name of God because we cannot know God, we cannot control God. So Yahweh is actually unpronounceable in Hebrew. Even more than that, what Richard Rohr mentions in his meditation is that the letters, when you pronounce the letters themselves, you end up with something that sounds like this. It sounds like an exhalation of breath. And now, hearing the name of God, unpronounceable, unknowable, the only way we can get to it is by breath, connects us back to a whole series of things in the scriptural traditions around God breathing life into humanity, about the Spirit being the breath of God. I mean, there are all of these images that we then can dive into that all come from the fact that this Yahweh name is most accurately represented by the sound of the exhalation of breath. So with that, that's how Richard Rohr frames one of his breathing exercises, the Yahweh prayer. And you might notice that most of the writers or thinkers or parts of the tradition that deal with prayer and contemplation have their own version of a breathing prayer. Breath is something that not only with anxiety, but with any part of meditation is so both intimately personal, because it just grounds us in our bodies, roots us down, and is also so universally seen as to have importance that it just comes up in everything. So just to jump in for a moment, I'm getting ready for a moment of meditation, so moments of quiet, but we'll jump in with Richard Rohr's version of a breathing meditation. So I ask you to find a comfortable place to sit, per usual. I'm sitting in this chair, and as I sit in this chair, I can feel my body being supported. I can feel my back being supported by the back of the chair, my legs and my hips being supported by the seat of the chair. And I'm sitting cross-legged so I can feel my feet supported by the chair as well, but you might feel your feet just floating on top of the earth. You might feel your feet pushing onto the earth, being pushed up by the earth. And allow your head and neck, your shoulders to drop and your head and neck to just expand upward, leaving this airy space in your body, just airy space. Your head is weightless, floating up, and your shoulders just sink down. If anything feels uncomfortable, don't try to push it. Don't try to do too much. We're just getting to a comfortable, relaxed place. And as we meditate for however long, I invite you to just breathe in through your mouth and breathe out through your nose. Breathe in through your mouth, breathe out through your nose. And as you breathe in and breathe out, I invite you to say the name, which isn't a name, Yahweh, or Yahweh. And after you've done that for a while, maybe it's a minute, maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10. I don't usually do more than 20. I invite you to check in again with your body. Relax your shoulders if they've come up. Let your head float upwards again and sink down into your chair as you continue breathing. You might find as you breathe that at the end of your inhale, you hold your breath for a second and then exhale. And then sit empty for a second. And then inhale and exhale. As you root yourself in your breath, I offer this meditation on breathing from Richard Rohr. The word that archetypal religion came up with for God, for the great I am, was a word mimicking breath itself, unspeakable, only breathable. The one thing we have been doing since we came out of our mother's body, and the one thing we will also cease to do when we die and pass into the eternal I am. Air, breath, wind, and spirit are always beyond us, yet totally around us, within us, and beyond us as we share it equally. It is the same air that we all breathe, and yet each of us receives it intimately. No one controls it. So with those words from Richard Rohr and with this time together in breathing, I hold you in my prayers this week, as I have the past many weeks that we've been in this pattern of being. And I hope that you are met with moments of stillness and moments of calm so that you can be recharged and rejuvenated and re-rooted in God to go out into the world and do God's work in the world, being the heart and hands of Christ in your communities. Amen.